Right, so I'm going to talk with you a bit this afternoon about design because it's one of the few things that I know much about. It's what I do for a job. I'm currently working as a freelance designer doing a mix of graphic design and industrial design. And I've worked with some extremely talented designers, model makers and engineers over the years. But I'm sure none of them would claim to be the greatest. And if you spoke to them and asked them who they thought was the greatest designer, I'm sure they'd all have different design heroes and different ideas about who the greatest designer in history is. Certainly one of the most well-respected industrial designers around today is this chap, Jony Ive, or Sir Jony Ive as he is now. He, until 2019, was head of design at Apple, and he led the design team there basically for 25 years during the period that Apple grew to become one of the biggest, most successful companies in the world. And during that time, he was responsible for designing many innovative products. Things like this, the iMac G3, which is the first home computer that wasn't just a beige box like every computer before it, or the iPod, which revolutionised the way that people listened to music at the time. Things like the iPad, the iPhone, the Apple Watch, all groundbreaking products. And it's generally accepted, I think, that Apple's success largely is a result of their design innovation and design excellence. And to give you an introduction into the world of design work, I'd like to play you a clip of Jony Ive. This is from 2013, and he's talking about Apple's approach to design, and hopefully this will give you an idea of what a designer does.
We have always thought of design as being so much more than just the way something looks. It's the whole thing, the way something actually works on so many different levels. Ultimately, of course, design defines so much of our experience. I think there is a profound and enduring beauty in simplicity, in clarity, in efficiency. True simplicity is derived from so much more than just the absence of clutter and ornamentation. It's about bringing order to complexity. iOS 7 is a clear representation of these goals. It has a whole new structure that is coherent and that is applied across the entire system. We've considered the tiniest details, like refining the typography, to much larger ones, like redesigning all the icons. And developing a grid system allowed us to achieve a much more harmonious relationship between individual elements. We've also incorporated a whole new palette of colors. We're a small design team. We've worked together for 20, 25 years. One of the things that we've learned is the importance of listening, because as we all know, the very best ideas can very often come from the quietest voice. Ideas are extremely fragile. Ideas are not predictable in terms of when you'll have them and how many you're going to have. And so over the years, we've really created a team and an environment that I think really increases the probability of good ideas, and when they actually arrive, I think nurtures them. The design studio really is a workshop. We design three-dimensional objects, and we make lots and lots of models and prototypes. Designing and making really should be inseparable. For every finished product that you see, tools had to be designed, process had to be created and experimented with. We've worked very hard to create a singular studio that has all of these different facets. The hallmark of the group has been to be inquisitive and ask an awful lot of questions. We have really made it a practice to just have our heads down and work and ignore, in some senses, all the reasons why something shouldn't be possible.
Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an impression of what happens in a design studio. So he spoke about how design is much more than just the way something looks, it's about the whole way it works. Design work isn't simply about making things look pretty. The function of the product is in fact the primary consideration. The visual aspects should facilitate the function. Something we often say is form follows function. And he talked about the operating system of the iPhone at the time and how the design team had put a huge amount of work into making it coherent as possible so that it was simple and intuitive to use. He touched on aesthetics. He talked about how there's a timeless beauty in clarity and simplicity and in what he described as ordered complexity. And I think, you know, he's right about that. There are fashions that come and go, but there are some classic looks which are timeless, they endure, which are inherently appealing to us. Because we are drawn towards visual order. We like it when things line up neatly, when things are evenly spaced, when things follow a regular pattern. And I think Apple have really mastered that clean, simple, ordered design language, and perhaps that's why their designs have such universal appeal all around the world to people of all ages. And something hopefully that clip illustrated is that design is in fact really hard work. A huge amount of effort goes into designing a successful product. And he described how even, you know, the tiniest details of things like the text spacing, the layout of the icons are considered and refined. And certainly I've experienced at work over the years, people come to us looking to get some design work done who hugely underestimate the time and effort that is involved. And they have the impression that design is just about doing a quick sketch, coming up with a nice, colourful visual. And the truth is you can do, you know, come up with any number of flash glossy images, and it's useless if you don't first put a substantial amount of time thinking and research and developing a good idea. He spoke there about how ideas are fragile, how they need to be nurtured with care and skill, otherwise they will come to nothing. And he spoke about how on every job many ideas are explored, but only a few are developed, so models and prototypes are made, but ultimately it's only one idea that is selected and put into production. And you know, it's a really intensive process, and as I said, one that a lot of hard work goes into. Something he didn't speak about there, but I've heard Johnny O speak about in the past, is that he thinks by looking at a product, you get a real sense of the person who designed it. It tells us about the person who designed it. I think there's truth in that. So for instance, when I look at Apple products, I get the impression that Johnny Ive is a smart, creative person. He's clearly dedicated. I suspect he's a bit of a perfectionist, and he's absolutely meticulous about refining his design work to every tiny last detail. If you compare him to another designer, this guy Philippe Starck, very successful designer, in the background is one of his famous designs. It's the lemon squeeze that he designed for Alessi back in 1990, and it's an iconic design. It's one that you often find in books about design. It's clearly a visually striking and elegant shape. And back when I was studying design, I remember thinking what a beautiful piece of design work it is. Sadly, owners of the lemon squeezer report that it isn't actually any good at squeezing lemons. It's because it's tall and top heavy, has a tendency to fall over when you try to use it. There's no mechanism for filtering out pips and pulp like most lemon squeezers. And the feet with its, the pointed metal legs tended to scratch up people's nice kitchen work surfaces. So from a functional point of view, this lemon squeezer was a bit of a disaster. So what does this design, what's this piece of design tell us about this designer, Philippe Starck? Well, I suggest it tells us that he's probably quite a fun, creative, flamboyant person, probably a bit of a show-off. I imagine he's full of ideas, but perhaps lacks the focus to really sit down and put the hard work into refining the design and actually getting it to work. Probably like all designers, I'm constantly looking around me at stuff around me, looking at things, working out how they've been manufactured, thinking about why the designer has made the decisions that they have, and sort of critiquing the design, thinking, well, is it good, is it bad, does it work well? Are there any ideas here that I could borrow in my next project? And to me, the most beautiful and brilliantly clever and technologically advanced designs are not man-made products or inventions, but those seen in nature. And it's clear to me that this points to a master designer. Knowing the painstaking effort that goes into designing a successful product, I simply don't buy the idea that these exquisite designs we see in nature could have come about by themselves, that they could have evolved from nothing by chance. And I don't think this requires any great intelligence, any scientific know-how. It's just common sense, as we read in Romans 1. God's eternal power and divine nature have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So it's clear, it's the natural, obvious conclusion to the evidence we see around us. And certainly this is an observation that people throughout history have made, probably expressed most famously by William Paley in his 1802 book, Natural Theology, where he said, let's say you're walking around and you find a watch on the ground, and as you examine it, you marvel at the intricately complex interweaving of its parts, a means to an end. Surely you wouldn't think this marvel would have come about by itself. The watch must have a maker. Just as the watch has such complex means to an end, so does nature to a much greater extent. Just look at the complexity of the human eye. Thus we must conclude that nature has a maker too. And as humans, we can distinguish objects that have been designed from those that have formed naturally. So take, for example, this grouping of found objects washed up by the sea. There's no question that someone has carefully placed these items into position so that they, first of all, they make a nice rectangle with straight edges and 90-degree corners. The objects are nicely spaced, evenly spaced, and they're neatly aligned vertically and horizontally. And as well, they're grouped together by colour, so all the orange objects are together, all the green objects are together, and so on. And so we know from looking at it that we could wait for billions of years and the sea would never wash up these items in such a carefully ordered pattern. And so we can spot deliberate order, we can spot design a mile off. In his opening chapter of his book, The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins wrote, biology is the study of complex things that appear to have been designed for a purpose. And then he spends the rest of his book defending his belief that they weren't designed, despite what the evidence points towards. And Francis Crick, one of the people who discovered the structure of DNA, he said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. So he's kind of saying, look, we need to resist what the evidence naturally points towards, keep telling yourself this wasn't designed. And to me, I just say, well, why resist it? The obvious conclusion that things appear to have been designed for a purpose is because they have. Humans, we are the most intelligent form of life on Earth, aren't we? We're an incredibly inventive people. And the way our technology has developed, especially in the last few hundred years, has been phenomenal. And yet the systems and the mechanisms that we see in living organisms are actually way more advanced than any technology, any products that we can produce. And to demonstrate this, I'd like to show you a clip from DARPA's Robotic Challenge. This is from 2015, and DARPA is the American government's advanced research agency, and they set up a competition to encourage development in robotics, and teams were challenged to design a robot that could carry out 8 specific tasks, including driving a vehicle, walking across rubble, opening a door, turning a valve, and using a power tool. And teams from the world's most prestigious universities, companies, and institutes of technology entered this competition. So, for example, on the screen there, that's NASA's entry. And so millions and millions of dollars were spent developing the robots that took part. And the following clip shows how they fared. So we see they struggled a little bit, didn't they? Of the 23 teams that entered, only 3 managed to complete all 8 tasks successfully. And in an interview that I saw with one of the team members, they said it's relatively easy to make a robot that performs a very specific task, for example, a robotic arm on a production line. But it's very difficult to make one that is versatile and has a range of abilities. And the winning team completed all the challenges it was 45 minutes long, and if you watch it, these robots move achingly slowly, and at a guess, a person going at a leisurely pace would take only 3 or 4 minutes to complete all the tasks. So in comparison to humans with all our amazing abilities, robots are very crude, aren't they? Not only are they physically clunky and clumsy, they have no consciousness. The robots there, they were controlled very closely by a team of people. They had minimal autonomous ability. And when they fall over, they need people to pick them up and fix them and replace the broken parts. And like us, we have amazing built-in self-repairing systems. You know, our bones, our skin can repair themselves. It's enormously impressive and sophisticated technology. And, you know, whereas we can function for most of the day on a cup of tea and a sandwich, the robots in the video were incredibly inefficient and required frequent battery recharging. And despite the advances that have been made over the years since that clip was made, we are still nowhere near designing an android with anything like human abilities. Despite all our intelligence, our resources, and our technology, we cannot come close to making something as good as a human being, which we're told came into being by chance. And over the years, designers, engineers, inventors have actually come to realise the fact that the technology present in nature is way beyond our own. And so increasingly are seeking to learn from it, to emulate it. And this idea has actually existed for centuries, but in recent years has been named biomimicry. And the next clip we're going to look at shows various examples of this.
What biomimics do is they say what in the natural world has already invented this, and then they try to mimic what they see. Normally when you say termites and building, you think of termites eating the buildings. But in this case, termites are teaching architects something. Termites actually create buildings of their own. Those termite mounds that you see, compared to the size of a termite, those are quite large skyscrapers. They're also amazing ventilation devices. Termites farm fungus, and so they need to keep that fungus at a particular temperature, 87 degrees Fahrenheit. No matter how hot it gets outside or how cold it gets outside, it has to be 87 degrees Fahrenheit. And they do this by creating channels inside their mounds. Scientists are now investigating those channels to see if we can replicate those channels in the walls of our buildings in order to increase ventilation in our own buildings. So here you have something so small as a termite, but it's creating a heating and air conditioning system that is far more efficient than our skyscrapers by shaving material use, by working in beautiful coordinated ways. Life's learned how to live gracefully on the planet. We're already living with a lot of biomimetic technologies. And if you use Velcro, Velcro comes from an inventor who took a hike with his dog, George Minstrel. When he got back home, he realized that there were seeds, burrs stuck to the hair, and he realized, wow, this is a really good design if you want to fasten something. And he looked at the burr under the microscope and he realized that it had tiny hooks. And so he invented this two-sided Velcro, one with loops and one with hooks. So biomimicry is all around us already. Radar was invented by looking at how organisms like bats put out a sound, and then they're able to almost see by reading those echoes. If you go through an airport and you go through one of those millimeter scanners, that's based on a bat called the Brazilian free-tailed bat. It's so precise that it allows this acoustic camera to see through clothing. I see biomimicry as a way that we can leapfrog towards a much more sustainable world. We've got a lot of problems to solve. Biomimicry helps you look into the natural world where they may have already been solved in a really elegant way. The ocean is a great place to look for brilliant solutions to some of the challenges we face on land as well as in the sea. One of the more exciting innovations is the use of shark skin patterns on hospital surfaces. In hospitals right now, superbugs are forming because we use so many antibiotics. We need a new way to deal with bacteria without killing them. Scientists were very curious about the Galapagos shark. It's a slow-moving, basking shark. And so they expected to find a lot of bacteria on its surface. And yet there were no bacteria. What actually was happening was they had nano ridges on them that were uncomfortable for bacteria to land on. A company called Sharklet has mimicked this surface structure to create thin films that you can put on door handles and railings and other hospital surfaces. And bacteria just simply do not like to land there. So here you have a whole new way of dealing with bacteria, repelling them rather than killing them. In the US, there's 100,000 hospital-acquired infections every year. To be able to prevent those by something as simple as a shape is a real breakthrough.
We live in a beautiful world surrounded by genius. Shark skin is antimicrobial and reduces drag. Lotus leaf plants have self-cleaning surfaces. Peacock feathers create color without pigment. Gecko foot pads create adhesion without adhesives. I've always been fascinated by the natural world. Number one, I see the inherent beauty. But secondly, on a deeper level, I look and I see possible solution sets to design challenges. We are natural beings. We are animals. And I think a lot of the problems that we face are tied indelibly to the fact that we have divorced ourselves from nature. But the good news is, again, as a young species, that we have a lot of mentors and evolutionary elders and a life's operating manual that we can consult. All of the solutions we seek out are right in front of us. We're surrounded by genius.
So designers and engineers have learned some invaluable lessons from the way that God has designed things. There are many other natural technologies that we'd love to mimic, but are still a long way out of our reach. For instance, the way an octopus can control its colour and pattern and even its texture, something that we would love to emulate. It could have so many applications, but we simply don't have the know-how or technology. That biomimicry expert at the end there, she fully appreciated the fact that we are surrounded by genius, and she could plainly see the brilliant design work, but sadly didn't believe in a creator, and she attributed it the great genius to evolution, to nature, to life itself. And she clearly holds nature in high regard as something we should listen to and to learn from, which reminds me of the words of Romans 1 that we read. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, and birds and animals and creeping things. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator. And this has happened, hasn't it, throughout history. People today really are no different. They deny the creator and they worship the creation. And many people today have an unshakable faith in the theory of evolution, and because they believe that evolution is responsible for all the amazing, wonderful things around us, in a way they worship it. And as I said, from my perspective as a designer, the theory of evolution is very difficult to believe. The idea that transmutations could have brought about such beautiful and intricate designs to me is just unfeasible. So, for example, if I were forced to design using an evolution-style process of tiny incremental changes, I simply wouldn't be able to do my job. So, for example, if I went from one bolt to a fully functional car, adding a single component at each stage, and at every stage, the item had to be a useful, functioning product, and it had to be a development of the previous version. It had to be better than its predecessor. That would be an impossible task. The engine alone requires all the components to be in place before it will work. A part-built engine is useless, isn't it? At any level of completion, whether it's 10%, 50%, even 99% complete, it's equally useless. It's not the case that it works partially but gradually gets better as it's built. It's only when it's fully assembled that it functions and is of any use. And even then, of course, it relies completely on the fuel, the electrical systems, the exhaust and cooling systems to function. Without those, it's useless. And it's the same with living organisms. Even the simplest forms of life are amazingly complex. And this guy, Dr. Stephen Seemeyer, will give us an example of that.
And what biologists, molecular biologists, cell biologists, microbiologists have been discovering is that at the level of individual cells, there are little tiny examples of nanotechnology, little tiny machines at work. The flagellar motor is the one that Behe made most famous. It's a rotary engine that powers a whip-like tail, protein tail, that functions like a propeller, and it moves the bacterium through liquid, enabling the bacterium to essentially track down its food supply. And this little machine includes a rotor, a stator, a drive shaft, a U-joint, bushings, bearings, and a whip-like tail that functions like a propeller. And the machine in some bacterial systems turns at 100,000 RPMs in one direction and can reverse direction on a quarter of a turn and turn 100,000 RPM in the other direction.
So an amazing little thing, this bacterial flagellum. Not something that could have been formed through multiple evolutionary steps. Just like an engine, it needs all its parts in place in order to function. If you remove a single component, it no longer works, it's useless. And by the way, bear in mind, this is a tiny, tiny piece of technology. It measures just 40 nanometers. So to give you some context, the diameter of a human hair is 80,000 nanometers. And we're always, aren't we, seeking to miniaturize our technology. But again, we see nature is just way ahead of us. We have no hope of ever being able to manufacture something so tiny and yet so complex. And bear in mind that this is part of a bacterial cell, supposedly one of the earliest, most simple forms of life, and yet it shows design and technology far beyond our abilities. And if you think about it, for evolution to occur, living organisms, even the most simple types, have to be able to sustain themselves, they have to be able to get energy in order to survive, and they have to be able to reproduce or to replicate themselves in some way to pass on their genetic code. Only then can natural selection, the survival of the fittest, take place. And so For evolution to be feasible, the very simplest forms of life had to be able to do something very sophisticated, something that even with all our technology and know-how today that we cannot match. We cannot make products that look after themselves, that feed or fuel themselves. We cannot make products with the ability to reproduce or replicate themselves. So these two functions alone point to a great designer. It's only recent times that scientists have started to discover how living organisms pass on their genetic codes to their offspring. And we know DNA in itself is enormously complex. It's an extraordinary piece of design work, and we don't have time to look at it together. But let me show you this quote from Bill Gates that he wrote in his book, The Road Ahead. He said, "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created." So the closer we look, the more we come to understand the world around us, the more we realise how complex and sophisticated it is. We considered the idea earlier that a designer's work tells us a lot about the designer. Their character comes through, it's revealed in the things that they design and make. So what does creation tell us about God? Well, I think it tells us he is a masterful designer. He is far greater than mankind in intelligence and power. We're told in Isaiah 55, verse 8, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." So God's creation shows us that God is great, that God is awesome, he has amazing power, and he deserves to be praised, and we are wise to listen to him and learn from him. It also, we can see by looking at creation, the great care that has gone into his design. So this tells us that he cares deeply about creation, he cares about us, he loves us as our creator, our father. Also, we learn from looking at creation that it is one big system, beautifully balanced. It's united, it's interdependent. So one tiny example, the bee completely relies on the flower completely relies on the bee. They cannot live apart from each other. And this speaks of how there is one God who created all things, who loves peace, he loves unity, and he wants us to work together peaceably, caring for one another, and to be united with him and his son. We said at the beginning, design always has a function. So what is the function of God's creation? Why did God create the world? Why did he create life? Well, I think we get our answer in Isaiah 45, where we read there, "For thus says the Lord, who created the heavens, he is God, who formed the earth and made it, he established it, he did not create it empty, he formed it to be inhabited." Okay, so that's the reason God created the earth, and he wants a relationship with the inhabitants of the earth, as the following verses tell us. "I am the Lord, and there is no other. I did not speak in secret in the land of darkness. I did not say to the offspring of Jacob, seek me in vain. I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right. Assemble yourselves and come, draw near together, you survivors of the nations. They have no knowledge who carry about their wooden idols and keep on praying to a God that cannot save. Declare and present your case. Let them take counsel together. Who told this long ago? Who declared it of old? Was it not I, the Lord? And there is no other God besides me, a righteous God and Saviour. There is none besides me. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is no other." So God's purpose, he created the earth to be inhabited, and from the beginning, God has called out to people in the hope that they would respond and be saved. And we see around us in the world now a world full of problems, largely the result of man's selfishness. But the Bible tells us God will send his Son to restore it to the perfection, to the way that it was when he first created it. And we can all be part of that wonderful new creation. But we have to respond. We have to put our faith in him. So if you're yet to develop a faith, my appeal to you is to look again at nature, because we can see evidence all around us of God in his exquisite design work. So thank you for listening.